There are moments when silence feels heavier than sound, when the world itself seems to remember something we do not. Perhaps you felt it too, standing before the ruins of an ancient place, the air still and charged, as though the stones were whispering in a language older than time. What do they remember that we have forgotten, and how much of what we call history is simply the echo of something lost? So before you drift too far into comfort, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what we're uncovering here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is, because somewhere, in another time, someone might be listening to the same silence. History, they say, begins with writing. But what if it also begins with forgetting? Our calendars, our kings, our dynasties, they give us the illusion of continuity. Yet every line we read in a textbook stands on the bones of an erased world. Archaeologists admit that more is missing than is known. Civilizations rise, burn, and vanish beneath centuries of dust, leaving behind fragments, a pot, a tablet, a myth. And between those fragments lie gaps so wide that we fill them with faith, not evidence. The further we look into the past, the more we sense a horizon beyond which memory dissolves into mystery. Take, for example, the enigma of the missing centuries. In the late 20th century, German historian Heribert Illig proposed the phantom time hypothesis, that roughly 300 years of medieval history, including the reign of Charlemagne, may never have occurred at all. The idea was dismissed by mainstream scholars, but it lingers like a shadow at the edge of reason. Whether true or not, it reminds us that time itself is curated, written by victors, translated by scribes, reconstructed by those who survived the fire. Between the fall of Rome and the dawn of the Renaissance, entire epochs blur, their artifacts scattered, their stories misaligned. Then there are the physical anomalies, those quiet stones that defy our timelines. Megaliths older than our civilizations, cut with techniques that still puzzle modern engineers. In the deserts of Egypt, beneath layers of sand, the great Sphinx stares with eyes weathered not by wind but by rain, a geological wound suggesting it predates the Sahara's dryness by thousands of years. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe rises from 10,000 BCE, built by people who should not have known how to carve pillars, align stars, or bury entire sanctuaries beneath the earth. Each discovery pushes history back another step, as though the past itself refuses to stay still. Yet the question remains, who were the ones before? Some researchers whisper forgotten epochs, lost civilizations erased not by conquest, but by cataclysm. The last ice age ended with chaos, floods, fires, global shifts in climate. Meltwater from collapsing glaciers raised the oceans more than 100 meters, swallowing coastlines, cities, memories. If there were advanced societies before that deluge, they now rest beneath miles of salt and darkness. And when the survivors began again, the stories became myths. Atlantis, Ziusudra, the Great Flood. Perhaps these tales are not inventions, but encoded memories from a world that drowned. But there is another kind of erasure, not by nature, but by design. Knowledge can be buried not only in sand, but in silence. Every empire controls its own narrative. The victors write, the defeated vanish, and the scribes edit time. When the Library of Alexandria burned, thousands of years of thought turned to smoke. But how much more was deliberately withheld? How much history has been rewritten to fit a more convenient truth? In every civilization, there are forbidden chronicles, hidden lineages, inconvenient discoveries that disappear as quickly as they surface. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not what has been lost, but what has been hidden. Still, there is something deeply human about trying to remember. We excavate ruins, decode inscriptions, build museums, small acts of defiance against the vast forgetting. Yet each discovery only deepens the question. The more we uncover, the more we realize how incomplete our story is. Carbon dating gives us numbers but not meaning. Pottery tells us habits, not beliefs. Bones whisper of bodies, not souls. What then is the real continuity of civilization? Is it the technology, the architecture, or the unspoken memory that drifts between generations like a dream, half remembered upon waking? Consider the rhythm of the planet itself. Ice ages come and go with a strange regularity. Magnetic poles shift, continents drift, and with each cycle, humanity seems to re-emerge, building anew upon forgotten foundations. Perhaps history is not a line but a spiral, repeating itself with subtle variations, each turn echoing the last. There are myths that speak of ages before ours, the Hindu yugas, the Greek ages of gold and bronze, the Hopi worlds destroyed and reborn. Different tongues, same pattern, rise, ruin, renewal. Could it be that civilization is not a single story, but a recurring dream the earth keeps having? If that is true, then we are living not in the first dawn, but in one of many. Beneath our cities may lie older cities, and beneath those, older still, layers of ambition, belief, and fear turn to stone. We dig, we classify, we date, and yet somewhere beneath the taxonomy of bones and artifacts, the soul of history hums softly, like a song just beyond hearing. Sometimes I wonder if we're not the most advanced form of humanity, but merely the latest, inheritors of tools we no longer understand, fragments of languages whose echoes still shape our thoughts. What would it mean to rediscover not just ancient artifacts, but ancient awareness, a memory of the world before it was broken into nations, before time was divided by calendars? Could that silence beneath history be more than absence? Could it be intention? Perhaps the earth itself remembers, holding every epoch like a page pressed beneath its crust, waiting for us to learn how to read again. And so, as the night deepens and the noise of modernity fades, imagine this. Somewhere beneath the quiet cities, beneath the weight of oceans and forgotten fields, the bones of another world are dreaming, a civilization older than myth, erased but not gone, humming softly in the dark. The silence is not empty, it is waiting. Sometimes, truth hides not in words, but in the texture of stone, in the quiet defiance of something that should not be there, yet is. Beneath the ruins and under the patient sky, there are blocks of granite and diorite carved with such precision that even the finest steel of our age trembles before them. How could hands, supposedly primitive, shape the unshapable? What memory guided their chisels? What lost understanding whispered in their geometry? At the high plateau of Bolivia lies a place called Pumapunku. Its stones weigh hundreds of tons, cut at right angles so exact they could fit together without mortar, as if once molded rather than carved. Some bear notches and interlocking joints, resembling the work of modern machining. The site is dated officially to around 500 CE, the Tiwanaku culture. The geological evidence tells another story. Fragments of magnetic sediment, shock-altered surfaces, and signs of cataclysmic displacement suggest something far older, something that witnessed a violent reshaping of the earth long before written history began. Beneath the sand of Lebanon, in the ancient city of Baalbek, rest the trilithum stones, each weighing around 800 tons. Even with today's cranes, moving one would test the limits of our technology. And yet, there they are, lifted and placed with eerie perfection atop earlier foundations. Below them lie even larger blocks, abandoned or never used, their corners too precise to be natural. Engineers study them, skeptics dismiss them, believers marvel at them. But perhaps the real question is simpler, not how they were moved, but who was moving them, and why. In Egypt, the Sphinx bears the same scars. Its body, eroded by rain and deep channels of water, tells a geological story of an age when the desert was not desert. Dr. Robert Shaw, in the 1980s, suggested the Sphinx might date back to at least 7,000 BCE, perhaps even earlier. His findings were met with silence, then with resistance. To admit such age would unravel the timeline of Egyptian civilization, forcing us to accept that someone, was already building in stone when most humans were still nomadic. The monument we thought was the beginning might in truth be the echo of something ending. Even deeper in time lies Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Unearthed in the late 20th century, pillars taller than men, arranged in circles engraved with animals no longer found in the region. Carbon dating places it around 9600 BCE, before pottery, before writing, before cities. And yet, it shows deliberate architecture, astronomical alignment, and ritual complexity. When it was no longer used, it was buried, intentionally, as if its builders knew something had to be hidden, preserved beneath the soil for another age to find. Who buries a temple unless they are saving it from the future? Each of these places, Pumapunku, Baalbek, the Sphinx, Göbekli Tepe, stands like a scar on the fabric of historical certainty. They do not shout, they do not boast, they simply remain, weathering time, as if aware that truth cannot be erased, only postponed. The closer we look, the more the stones seem to speak a language of loss. Their geometry becomes a code, a map to something we can no longer fully read. There are patterns too that seem to connect them. The same orientation towards solstices, the same obsession with the stars, the same use of enormous weight, as though the builders sought permanence beyond comprehension. Even the placement of these sites often corresponds to points of geomagnetic interest, ley lines, or telluric intersections. Ancient knowledge of the Earth's energetic anatomy, rediscovered now through satellites and science. How could isolated cultures separated by oceans build with such shared precision? Could it be that they inherited something, fragments of knowledge carried through myth, across floods and resets? Modern science often answers with coincidence or parallel evolution of ideas. Yet the older one studies these anomalies, the harder coincidence becomes to sustain. The blocks at Pumapunku bear cut marks consistent with high-frequency tools or abrasion technology we cannot reproduce without industrial equipment. The basalt vases of ancient Egypt show spiral tool marks, as if cut by mechanical drills rather than copper chisels. We call these outliers, as if the exception were less real than the rule. But what if the rule itself is wrong? There are myths that remember, faintly. In the Andes, legends speak of Viracocha, the bearded god who brought knowledge and vanished. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu, 7 sages who taught writing, architecture, and law, before returning to the deep. In Egypt, Thoth, the ibis-headed keeper of knowledge, said to have built the temples before the flood. These names drift across continents and epochs, yet their archetype remains constant. The teacher from before time, the one who returns after ruin. Perhaps the stones are not monuments but messages, coordinates left for when the next civilization is ready to listen. The more we uncover, the more deliberate the silence seems. In Baalbek, the deeper layers suggest rebuilding upon rebuilding, a city standing on the bones of older cities. The Romans called it Heliopolis, the city of the sun, yet they admitted the foundations were already ancient in their day. The Egyptians too inherited their sacred sites, claiming they were restorations, not creations. Even the Mayans spoke of older gods, older worlds, each cycle rising upon the ashes of the last. We have been here before, the stones seem to say. We have built and forgotten, built and fallen, built and returned. In laboratories and academic journals, these discussions rarely survive without controversy. Scholars fear pseudoscience, believers fear ridicule, yet both are haunted by the same unease, the sense that something about our past does not add up. The human story as told is too short, too linear, too convenient. And so, the evidence that contradicts it becomes an inconvenience, pushed aside, catalogued as anomaly. But anomalies, when they begin to outnumber the rules, stop being exceptions. They become signs of another truth. Perhaps the stones endure because they are patient. They wait for us to remember what we once knew. They hold, within their impossible angles and cosmic alignments, the fingerprints of an intelligence that moved through this world long before ours. Not aliens, perhaps, but ancestors. A humanity older, wiser, erased by time, remembered only through rock and myth. And as we touch those stones today, brushing the dust of millennia from their faces, maybe what we truly seek is not knowledge, but recognition, the echo of ourselves before we forgot. The night wind moves softly across the ancient ruins, whispering between gaps of stone that still fit together like puzzle pieces. Somewhere the earth hums with memory. Perhaps it is not that the stones should not exist, but that we should not have forgotten why they do. The stars have always been watching, long before ink met parchment, before words were trapped in stone. The sky was the first library, and we were its readers. But somewhere along the way we forgot how to read. We began to see the constellations as decoration, not instruction, as poetry, not geometry. Yet the ancients, whoever they truly were, left their questions carved not in paper, but in alignment, monumental markers that whisper to the heavens. What if the sky remembers what the earth has lost? Across deserts, jungles, and forgotten highlands, ancient monuments gaze upward in deliberate harmony with celestial bodies. At Giza, the three great pyramids mimic the stars of Orion's belt with uncanny precision, not roughly, not symbolically, but mathematically aligned to a configuration that existed around 10,500 BCE. To stand beneath their weight and look at that alignment is to realize that someone, somewhere in the deep past, knew the slow precession of the equinoxes, a wobble in Earth's rotation that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. Who could have known such a thing without telescopes or timepieces, unless they'd been watching the heavens for longer than we've been willing to imagine? Further south, in the Sahara, long before it became a desert, lies Nubtar Playa, a circle of stones older than Stonehenge, set precisely to mark the rising of certain stars and the turning of seasons. Radiocarbon dating places it between 7,000 and 6,500 BCE. Its builders were nomadic herders, supposedly incapable of advanced astronomy. Yet their stone circle aligns with Sirius, the same star the later Egyptians would associate with Isis, rebirth, and the annual flooding of the Nile. It is as if the knowledge of the stars had already been ancient even then, passed down through cycles of ruin and remembering. At Göbekli Tepe, the stone pillars tell the same story. Their animal carvings have been interpreted not as decoration, but as constellations, a prehistoric zodiac preserving the memory of a cosmic event. In 2017, researchers proposed that one of the reliefs represents the date of a great impact, perhaps the comet strike associated with the Younger Dryas, cooling around 10,900 BCE. If true, the site becomes not just a temple, but a memorial, a record of catastrophe written in stellar language. The sky, once their teacher, became their warning. In the Andes, the alignment continues. The ancient city of Tiwanaku and its mysterious gate of the sun track solar and lunar cycles with such precision that, when corrected for precession, they point again to an age far older than their supposed construction. The same celestial obsession shapes the architecture of the Maya, whose pyramids breathe light during equinoxes, casting serpentine shadows that crawl down their steps as the heavens shift. Different continents, different epochs, and yet the same sacred geometry binds them. Perhaps these builders were not gazing upward out of superstition, but remembering something deeper, an inheritance of celestial knowledge once common, later fragmented by floods and fires. Every ancient culture speaks of teachers who came from the stars or were guided by them, but maybe from the stars does not mean out there. Maybe it means from the knowledge of the stars, the awareness that all life below reflects the order above. There is a haunting pattern hidden in that order. Many of these sites, Giza, Teotihuacan, Angkor Wat, are spaced at intervals corresponding to astronomical constants. Their latitudes encode numbers related to planetary cycles, lunar precession, and even the speed of light. Coincidence, say the skeptics, yet coincidences rarely compose symphonies. The architecture of these places seems less like a product of trial and error, and more like a translation, a deliberate attempt to fix cosmic truths into stone, preserving them for a time when the world would once again be capable of listening. If one traces the map of such alignments across the Earth, it begins to look less like random construction and more like memory, as if the builders were reactivating the nodes of a forgotten network. The pyramids mirror Orion. The Angkor complex reflects Draco. Stonehenge predicts eclipses. Even in the Americas, the Hopi masses align with the stars of Orion, echoing the same pattern found in Egypt. Cultures that never met, guided by the same celestial fingerprint. Could this be a coincidence of survival, that after every global reset the survivors rebuilt in reference to the heavens, as though reclaiming orientation itself? The ancients did not divide the sacred and the scientific. To them, watching the stars was an act of devotion, and building in their image was a kind of prayer. Their monuments were calendars, observatories, and sanctuaries all at once. Machines of stone, resonating with cosmic rhythm. But over millennia, we lost that synthesis. Modern science looks upward and sees only matter. Modern faith looks upward and sees only spirit. The old world saw both, interwoven. Perhaps this is why their memory feels so alive. It was built not only from intellect, but from reverence. Some astronomers argue that ancient alignments are coincidences, that humans, pattern-seeking by nature, impose meaning upon randomness. Yet those same astronomers depend upon mathematical precision, and the precision here is irrefutable. The Great Pyramid's orientation deviates from true north by only a fraction of a degree, more accurate than any other structure for thousands of years. To dismiss such mastery as accident is to underestimate both our ancestors and ourselves. It is easier to believe they were mistaken than to face the possibility that we have forgotten more than they ever knew. Every time I read of these alignments, I wonder if the builders were leaving not just messages but warnings. The stars mark cycles of growth, of decay, of return. Ancient texts speak of ages when the heavens shifted and chaos followed. Fire from above, floods below, the fall of kings, the rebirth of the world. Perhaps these alignments were meant to remind us that what happens above always finds reflection below. The sky's rhythm is not decorative, it is prophetic. Maybe that's why, deep down, we still look up at night. The same constellations that guided the first builders still burn above us, patient and unchanged. Orion still strides across the winter sky. Sirius still rises with the dawn. The same ancient geometry connects us to those who came before. When we stare long enough, the noise of history fades, and we can almost feel their presence. The forgotten astronomers, the star readers, the architects of memory. If you listen closely, you might hear it. A silence that hums with numbers, with cycles, with the turning of time itself. The ancients built their questions into stone and aligned them with eternity, trusting that one day someone would notice. Maybe that someone is us. And as the constellations glide slowly across the dark, we are left to wonder, were they worshipping the stars, or were they warning the future? If the land remembers in ruins, then the sea remembers in silence. Beneath its shifting skin lies a library of stone, 1,000 cities drowned and forgotten. The surface glitters with light and wind, but below it, in the slow, cold dark, there are walls, temples, roads, and dreams. We think of history as written on dry land, yet most of humanity's memory is locked away beneath the waves, sealed not by time, but by water. And water, unlike fire, preserves what it consumes. There are places divers whisper about in half-truths and blurred photographs. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, lie submerged structures that stretch for miles along the seabed. Sonar scans reveal grids of streets, platforms, and circular temples. Archaeologists initially dismissed them as natural formations, until pottery fragments, anchors, and carved stones emerged from the sand. Carbon dating suggested human activity over 9,000 years ago, a date that bends the accepted timeline of Indian civilization beyond comfort. Could this have been the real Dwarka, the legendary city of Krishna, said to have sunk into the sea at the end of an age? Half a world away, divers off Japan's Ryukyu Islands stumbled upon another enigma in 1986, the Yonaguni Monument. Massive terraces, stairways, and sharp angles carved into solid rock. Some claim it's natural erosion, others insist it's too deliberate, too human. Its orientation, precise to the cardinal directions, hints at ancient awareness of geometry and compass. Marine geologists estimate its submersion around 10,000 BCE, the same epoch as Göbekli Tepe, on the last violent end of the Ice Age. Perhaps it once stood on land, a shrine or citadel, before the sea rose and claimed it. Further west, near the shores of Cuba, sonar in 2001 detected vast symmetrical shapes more than 600 meters beneath the surface. Pyramids, roads, and plazas spanning several square kilometers. The structures lie too deep to have been built by any known civilization within recorded history, suggesting an age before the last glacial melt, when sea levels were far lower. The researchers who found them called it a lost city, though they hesitated to name it, perhaps because naming gives something power, and acknowledging it would mean admitting how much we've lost. The Great Melt was not gentle. Around 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas period ended with abrupt warming, the ice sheets cracked, and the oceans rose more than 100 meters. Imagine the sound of it. Continents drowning, coastlines devoured, whole cultures watching their world vanish beneath the tide. Myths call it the flood. Science calls it a meltwater pulse. But maybe they are the same event described through different kinds of memory. The deluge is not fiction. It is geological fact. The only question is how many civilizations it erased. When we speak of Atlantis, we speak in metaphor, a symbol of arrogance, punishment, and loss. Yet even Plato's dialogue, when read carefully, does not claim it as myth. He places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, destroyed in a single day and night of fire and flood, 9,000 years before Solon, precisely the era of the last great rising sea. The story, he says, was told by Egyptian priests who remembered it as history. Mainstream archaeology calls it allegory. But why would Egyptian scholars invent a cataclysm already preserved in their own temple texts? The same priest who spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time when the gods walked among men, before the flood swept it all away. The sea buries but does not lie. In 2022, new sonar mapping revealed hundreds of submerged river channels beneath the Mediterranean, evidence of fertile valleys that once cradled early human settlements. Off the coast of Malta, temples lie drowned at depths inconsistent with their supposed age. In the North Sea, archaeologists discovered Doggerland, a vanished land mass that once connected Britain to Europe. Populated by hunters and builders, they found tools, hearths, and bones scattered under layers of marine sediment. Proof that an entire landscape, and the people within it, disappeared when the waters rose. Perhaps this is why so many ancient myths remember the ocean as both destroyer and teacher. In Sumer, the god Enki sends knowledge from the deep. In Mesoamerica, the sea god Tlaloc gives and takes civilizations. The Pacific Islands tell of lands swallowed overnight. The Polynesians still sing of Hawaii, their drowned homeland. These are not coincidences of imagination. They are the shared trauma of species-level memory, stories of survival encoded into the collective soul of humanity. When we look at the submerged ruins, we're not just studying lost architecture, we're staring at a mirror of our own fragility. What we call prehistory may simply be the pages we've yet to recover from the seabed. Each wave carries whispers of something older, deeper, not myth, but testimony. The earth does not forget, it only hides. Technology now allows us to peer beneath the waves with sonar, LiDAR, and robotic eyes. What we find is both thrilling and disquieting: ruins that predate agriculture, artifacts that rewrite our understanding of migration, coastlines etched with harbor walls, thousands of years before official history allows for ships. The evidence accumulates quietly, like sediment, until it becomes impossible to ignore. Yet official narratives remain cautious, as if admitting the truth would invite the flood again, a flood of doubt, of wonder, of awakening. But maybe that awakening is precisely what the sea has been guarding. Beneath the crushing depths, where light cannot reach, time moves differently. Organic matter decays slower. Stone preserves its story longer. It is as though the ocean has been keeping these relics safe, waiting for us to remember how to listen. The sound of sonar echoes through the abyss like the heartbeat of curiosity, and every returning ping is a whisper from another world. We spend so much effort mapping the stars, yet the real Atlantis, the real first civilization, might be resting right beneath our feet, buried under centuries of tides. Perhaps our ancestors knew this. Perhaps that's why they built their myths around water, why baptism and rebirth are tied to drowning and cleansing. Water erases, but it also begins again. Imagine for a moment walking on a coastline 10,000 years ago, unaware that the sea was coming, the horizon calm, the air heavy with salt and sun. Then, in a few generations, or a single night, the ocean reclaims it all. Cities vanish, names vanish, and the survivors wander inland carrying nothing but stories. And those stories become our myths. So when we listen to the sound of waves tonight, perhaps what we are truly hearing is not the sea but memory itself. A civilization's last breath turned into rhythm, repeating eternally against the shore. The sea does not lie. It remembers everything we tried to forget. Before words were written, they were sung. Long before alphabets or tablets, language itself was sacred, a rhythm that bound thought to breath, breath to meaning, and meaning to memory. Somewhere in the deep past, humans began to speak not only to each other, but to the cosmos. Our first scripts, carved or pressed into clay, were not merely records. They were echoes of something much older, a memory of sound made visible. And when we look closely at those earliest marks, we see something strange. They appear suddenly, complete, as though inherited rather than invented. The Sumerians, in what is now Iraq, gave us cuneiform around 3200 BCE, wedge-shaped impressions pressed into soft clay. But even in its earliest form, it was already complex. Grammar, numbers, trade, astronomy, law. There is no earlier stage of experimentation, no childish scroll of a developing system. It arrives fully formed, like a language remembering itself. The same happens in Egypt with hieroglyphs, in the Indus Valley with its undeciphered symbols, in China with the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty. How could such sophistication emerge simultaneously across civilizations that, according to history, had no contact with one another? The mystery deepens with the Tartaria tablets, small clay discs discovered in Romania, dated to around 5300 BCE. They bear markings eerily similar to Sumerian script, though predating it by 2 millennia. Some scholars call them proto-writing, others ritual symbols, but their symmetry, repetition, and contextual patterns suggest structured communication. If this is true, then literacy began not in Mesopotamia, but in the forgotten heart of old Europe. Perhaps writing was not a single invention, but a reawakening, the resurfacing of an older memory passed through myth, migration, and time. Linguists trace modern tongues through families, Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan, but beneath them lie whispers of something shared, a proto-language scholars call Nostratic. Its reconstructed roots appear across continents, linking words for water, earth, and sky. It's as if early humanity once spoke a single tongue, before dispersion fractured it into dialects of survival. Myths remember this moment as the Tower of Babel, the time when humanity's unified voice was divided. But what if Babel was not punishment, but consequence? Perhaps cataclysm scattered not only bodies, but words. There are patterns too precise to dismiss. The symbol of the serpent, representing knowledge, cycles, and cosmic duality, appears from Mesoamerica to Mesopotamia, from the Indus seals to Norse runestones. A spiral, the triskelion, a sun cross, all reappear across cultures separated by oceans. Language, in its symbolic form, seems to have transcended geography. These were not coincidences, but remnants of a symbolic grammar humanity once shared. A visual tongue that spoke directly to intuition, bypassing speech. The Indus Valley script, still undeciphered, might be one of its last surviving dialects. Over 4,000 short inscriptions have been found, carved on seals, tools, and pottery. They show repeated patterns suggesting syntax, but the language itself remains mute, locked behind millennia of sand and academic caution. What if, like a forgotten chord, we've lost the key to its resonance? Some researchers have noted similarities between its symbols and early Sumerian pictographs, a connection that would imply cultural exchange long before trade routes existed. Were these people inheritors of a lost world's literacy? Even myths of divine speech echo this possibility. In Egypt, Thoth was said to have given humanity writing to preserve wisdom after the flood. In Sumer, Enki taught the first kings the Me, tablets of knowledge containing the laws of civilization. In Hindu tradition, Saraswati, goddess of speech, birthed the universe through vibration, Vak, the sacred word. And in the Gospel of John we read, "In the beginning was the Word." Across continents, language is portrayed not as invention but as revelation, as if humanity once heard something greater and spent the rest of history trying to repeat it. Sound itself carries strange power. Ancient temples were built to resonate, chambers tuned to human voice frequencies, amplifying chants into standing waves. In the hypogeum of Malta, a low male tone around 110 Hz can trigger deep states of perception, affecting brainwaves and heartbeat. Perhaps the ancients understood that language was not only meaning, but vibration, a bridge between mind and matter. If so, early scripts were attempts to capture that vibration, to make the ephemeral visible. When the Rosetta Stone was found in 1799, it unlocked the mystery of Egyptian hieroglyphs by aligning three scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic, all saying the same thing. But imagine if we found a true Rosetta of humanity, a tablet that aligned not three languages but all of them, revealing a common source older than civilization. Would we still call it myth? Or would we finally admit that our ancestors might have spoken with one voice, in harmony with the earth itself? Modern linguistics, though rigorous, cannot fully explain the poetic symmetry between distant tongues. The Japanese word sora, meaning sky, echoes the ancient Sumerian shar, meaning firmament. The Proto-Indo-European root devos, meaning bright or god, appears in Sanskrit as deva, in Latin as deus, and in Norse as tiwas. The same roots shining through millennia suggest that divinity and light were once synonymous, that words themselves carried memory like genetic code. We like to think language evolved from grunts to grammar, from chaos to clarity. But what if it's the opposite? What if language has been eroding, losing its sacred resonance with each generation? The first tongues might have been vibrational languages, their sounds shaped to align with natural frequencies, able to calm, heal, or awaken. What if our myths of the language of the gods are literal memories of such a time? When words could move stone, command water, or commune with stars. Even today, fragments remain. Tibetan monks chant harmonic tones that alter brain waves. Indigenous shamans use phonetic rhythms that mirror heartbeats. The Hebrew Kabbalah assigns numerical and sonic values to each letter, believing creation itself vibrates through them. Language in its purest form was never just communication. It was creation. And maybe that's what we've forgotten, that words are alive. The first languages spoke to the stars not because they described them, but because they resonated with them. Each syllable a pulse in harmony with the cosmos. Over time, we reduced that song to syntax. We broke it into alphabets, then printed it into silence. Now, when we speak, the stars no longer listen, or perhaps they still do, waiting for us to remember how to speak in their tongue again. Somewhere, buried in the earth or sleeping beneath the sea, there may still exist a tablet, a disc, or a seal that bridges the gap. The moment when the human voice first translated the universe into sound. Until then, we trace the echoes, following the rhythm that connects all things, because language, like light, never truly disappears. It travels endlessly through the void, waiting for a mind to hear it once more. There's a story buried beneath our feet, not in books, but in bone. The earth keeps its own archive, a library of skeletons pressed into stone and soil. We are taught that evolution is a straight ascent, from primitive ape to modern man, yet sometimes the ground yields evidence that doesn't quite fit the script. Massive femurs, elongated skulls, jewels large enough to fit our own inside them. Most are dismissed, mislabeled, or quietly lost. But once in a while, one escapes the silence, and for a moment the illusion of a tidy history trembles. Archaeologists have unearthed countless human remains across continents, but a peculiar category of finds haunts the archives. Bones that seem too large, too advanced, or too old. In 1877, near a coal mine in Ohio, workers uncovered a human skeleton estimated at over 8 feet tall, with a massive skull and double rows of teeth. The discovery was briefly reported in local newspapers, then vanished. Donated to a museum that never displayed it. Similar accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries appear across North America, describing enormous skeletons discovered in burial mounds, often associated with advanced craftsmanship and copper tools. The Smithsonian collected many of these remains, though none are on display today. The official stance is clear. All such reports were either errors, exaggerations, or hoaxes. Yet the stories persist, echoing from Appalachia to the Pacific, whispered as if the bones themselves refused to stay buried. In Peru, the Paracas skulls tell another mystery. Unearthed in the 1920s, these elongated crania, some nearly 25% larger than average human skulls, sparked debates that still linger. The conventional explanation is cranial deformation, an ancient practice achieved by bonding the head during infancy. Yet DNA analyses conducted in the 2010s hinted at anomalies, mutations not typical of known human groups, sequences inconsistent with the local population. The tests were later deemed inconclusive, but the unease remained. What if those skulls belonged not to a ritual tradition, but to a lineage now erased from history? Then, there are the Denisovans, a species we did not even know existed until 2010, when a fragment of finger bones found in a Siberian cave. The DNA revealed a branch of humanity, distinct from both Neanderthals and modern Homo sapiens, yet interbreeding with both. Some of their descendants still walk among us, carrying traces of Denisovan genes linked to altitude adaptation, immune resilience, even physical strength. It is a reminder that our lineage was never singular. We are the sum of many forgotten peoples, the genetic ghosts alive in our blood. The boundary between human and other blurs into myth. And myth, strangely enough, has always remembered giants. In Sumer, the Nephilim were said to be the offspring of gods and mortals, beings of immense stature and knowledge. In Greek lore, the Titans built mountains. In Norse sagas, the Jotuna shaped the world itself. Native American tribes tell of the Seeteka, red-haired giants who once ruled the land before vanishing. Across Africa, Asia, and Oceania, similar stories endure, too widespread to be coincidence, too detailed to be dismissed as fantasy. Could it be that myth is memory, distorted by time but grounded in truth? The fossil record, too, whispers contradictions. In the early 20th century, miners in California's Lovelock Cave discovered mummified remains of unusually tall individuals, alongside artifacts, baskets, sandals, tools, sized for bodies much larger than normal. The finds were documented, photographed, and later scattered across small museums. The cave itself has been sanitized for tourism, its secrets replaced with polite exhibits. Official archaeology attributes the legends to misinterpretation. Yet even local Paiute elders maintain that their ancestors fought a race of giants who lived in that very place. Their oral traditions, preserved for generations, match the physical evidence uncannily well. The bones of such beings rarely survive scientific scrutiny. They're often lost in transit, classified, or declared to belong to animals despite contemporary documentation suggesting otherwise. This pattern, discovery, excitement, dismissal, disappearance, repeats so consistently that it feels almost ritualistic. Whether through error, bureaucracy, or deliberate omission, the message is clear. Certain narratives are safer than others. The neat linear tale of human progress tolerates no anomalies, and yet the Earth keeps reminding us that we are not its first curiosity. The deeper we dig, the stranger the record becomes. In South Africa, Homo naledi, small-brained yet capable of ritual burial, forces us to reconsider intelligence. In Indonesia, Homo floresiensis, the hobbit species, defies assumptions about size and capability. What if there were also larger counterparts, forgotten cousins who once ruled the high plains and vanished in cataclysm? Evolution, after all, is not a ladder but a labyrinth. We have wandered its corridors for millions of years and only just begun to see the walls. Some researchers whisper of cyclical resets, extinction events that wiped away entire branches of humanity. Each time the planet turned its page, a few survived, carrying fragments of memory. Perhaps those giants, if they existed, were remnants of a pre-Ice Age civilization, engineered or adapted for another world, a climate, gravity, or purpose long gone. Their bones would be the last proof of an epoch erased not by chance but by necessity. In ancient temples, the scale of architecture itself seems to echo their legend. The doorways of Baalbek, the monoliths of Sacsayhuaman, the steps of Ollantaytambo, all built for beings larger than us. Were these monuments tributes or homes? Did the myths of gods among men begin as memories of these forgotten ancestors, whose heightened strength inspired awe in the survivors? It is easy to laugh at the idea of giants, yet the same world once hosted mammoths, saber-toothed cats, birds with 20-foot wingspans, and reptiles that dwarfed buildings. The environment allowed it. Why not humanity? Nature does not draw its limits around our imagination. We do. Perhaps the real question is not whether giants existed, but why we are so determined to deny them. Maybe because their bones would tell a story we're not ready to hear, that we are not the pinnacle, but the residue of something grander. That once, long ago, there were forms of humanity whose presence dwarfed ours not only in size, but in spirit. As I imagine those bones beneath layers of soil, I wonder if they're still there listening. The earth holds them close, heavy with memory, patient as stone. Someday, perhaps, we'll unearth one that refuses to vanish, one so undeniable that history will have no choice but to stretch to fit it. Until then, the silence beneath our feet grows thicker, humming with secrets too vast for the living. The ground is not empty, it remembers. And sometimes, in the shifting of soil or the tremor of time, it breathes, reminding us that the story of humanity may be far taller than we ever dreamed. If the earth could dream, its dreams would be of fire and ice. Time does not flow evenly here. It shatters, recoils, begins again. Civilizations bloom, collapse, and rise once more, like the slow pulse of a sleeping giant. For centuries, humanity has believed in progress, a steady climb from primitive to advanced, from ignorance to enlightenment. But what if progress is not ascent but repetition? What if every age we build is simply another echo of one that came before? The theory of the Great Reset is not new. It is as ancient as the earth itself, written in the scars of stone and the patterns of myth. Geologists call it the Younger Dryas boundary, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions about 2,900 years ago, when temperatures plummeted and megafauna vanished almost overnight. Something struck the planet, or perhaps erupted within it, triggering global fires and floods. Layers of platinum and microscopic spherules have been found from North America to Syria, remnants of cosmic debris or vaporized rock. The debate continues. Was it a comet, a series of solar storms, or the Earth's own magnetic convulsion? Whatever the cause, the aftermath was apocalyptic. Oceans rose, forests burned, and whatever civilizations existed along those prehistoric coastlines disappeared beneath the deluge. Ancient texts remember this in poetic fragments. The Sumerian Eridu Genesis tells of a flood that ended the reign of early kings. The Mayan Popol Vuh speaks of a world destroyed by water, fire, and darkness. The Greek Timaeus recounts how the earth trembled and in a single night and day of misfortune the island of Atlantis disappeared. These stories are separated by continents and languages, yet their pattern is identical. They are not prophecies, they are memories. The Younger Dryas impact theory, once dismissed as fringe, has gained quiet traction. In Greenland, ice cores reveal traces of soot and cosmic platinum. At Abu Huraira in Syria, melted glass and shock-fractured quartz show signs of extreme heat, hotter than any natural wildfire. Across the American Midwest, black mats of carbon mark a layer of sudden death. Mammoths, mastodons, and human settlements alike buried under the same horizon of ash. If this was merely climate fluctuation, it was a fluctuation violent enough to erase an entire chapter of Earth's history. But the question that lingers is not how the world changed. It is who lived to remember it. If there were civilizations before that cataclysm, their ruins now rest beneath the oceans we mapped in the previous part. These efevers, scattered across continents, may have carried fragments of knowledge, astronomy, geometry, agriculture, which they passed down to younger societies. That could explain the sudden appearance of advanced architecture and myths of divine teachers after 10,000 BCE. The so-called Neolithic Revolution may not have been innovation at all, but recollection. Humanity, rising from the ashes, repeating the same sacred designs with hands that had forgotten their purpose. There are scholars who speak of cyclical cataclysms not as chance, but as rhythm. The sun itself breathes in violent cycles. Coronal outbursts, magnetic reversals, and cosmic storms. Every 12,000 years or so, the solar activity peaks in a way that could destabilize climate, melt glaciers, and reset the biosphere. Some call it coincidence that this interval mirrors the time since the last ice age collapse. Others whisper that it is no coincidence at all, that the Earth, like its star, follows a pulse too vast for our brief lifespans to feel. Throughout myth, these resets are coded as ages. The Hindu yugas, the Greek ages of gold, silver, and iron, Hopi worlds destroyed and renewed. Each ends in purification, fire, flood, or freezing. Each begins anew from a remnant, a few survivors who preserve the seed of memory. It is as if humanity has been through this many times, rising, thriving, forgetting, and beginning again. The Sumerians listed kings who ruled for hundreds of thousands of years before the flood, their reigns absurd by modern reckoning but eerily consistent with the cycles described by cosmic time. Are these mere exaggerations, or symbolic echoes of civilizations that lasted longer than ours has so far endured? If the pattern is real, then we are not unique. We are the latest iteration of a story older than a language, a civilization standing at the edge of another turning. The ice melts again. Storms grow stranger. Magnetic poles drift. Volcanoes awaken. We call it climate change, as though naming it grants control. But the Earth is older, patient, cyclical. It remembers what we refuse to. There are whispers, too, of deliberate resets, not by nature, but by design. Some theorists argue that knowledge itself is periodically erased, controlled, and rewritten to maintain order. Empires rise on new calendars, old histories burned, libraries consumed by fire. The destruction of Alexandria, the suppression of pre-Columbian science, the censorship of heretical cosmologies, all acts of erasure dressed as progress. When knowledge becomes too vast, it threatens the hierarchy built upon ignorance. Perhaps not all resets are geological. Some are intellectual, some are moral. Still, the physical evidence remains the most haunting. Meltwater channels carved into bedrock, boulders transported by forces no glacier could explain, vitrified forts in Scotland that show stone melted into glass. all hint at cataclysmic energy. In South America, Lake Titicaca sits 12,000 feet above sea level, yet contains seashells and marine fossils, as though it was once at the ocean's edge. Something shifted the planet itself, tectonic, magnetic, or celestial, tilting the axis of memory. Scientists today speak of existential risk, asteroid impact, solar flare, nuclear winter. The ancients would simply call it renewal. But perhaps what terrifies us most is not destruction, but rediscovery. The idea that civilization might return, again and again, to the same fragile brilliance, only to be humbled by the same cosmic rhythm. In this light, the Great Reset is not conspiracy, but continuity. The Earth resets not to punish, but to balance. Life forgets in order to begin again. Maybe that is the true engine of evolution, not survival of the fittest, but survival of the most remembering. Each epoch builds upon the ruins of the last, just as coral builds upon coral, layer upon layer, until the living rest upon the bones of the dead. If you listen closely to the wind in ancient valleys, you might hear it. The pulse of the planet, deep and slow, older than kings or calendars, a reminder that all our empires, our technologies, our names, are but temporary vibrations in the long song of Earth. One day, this age will pass too. The seas will rise, the skies will burn, and the next civilization will find our bones and wonder, as we now wonder of those before us. What strange beings built so high and vanished so completely? And perhaps, when that happens, they will not fear the end, but recognize it. Because endings in truth are only intervals between awakenings. The Earth breathes in resets, and somewhere between those breaths, humanity dreams and forgets. Once more, every civilization begins its story with a visitation. Before kings and priests, before cities and crops, there are always the teachers, beings of light, feathered serpents, or celestial architects descending from the sky or rising from the sea. Their names change with geography, but their function remains constant: to guide, to build, to awaken. It is as if humanity has never invented gods, only renamed the same forgotten ones. The myths call them divine, but what if they were something else? Survivors of a world before ours, carrying the memory of the last great age. In the tablets of Sumer, the oldest known writing, the Anunnaki appear as those who came from heaven to earth. They bring agriculture, astronomy, writing, and kingship, the very building blocks of civilization, and then vanish, leaving humanity to govern itself. The Akkadian texts speak of them as those of royal seed, while the later Assyrians depict them with wings, holding pine cones and strange devices that resemble instruments of measurement. Scholars interpret them symbolically, but perhaps symbols are the only way the ancients could describe beings who lived beyond their comprehension. The Codex of the Gods, if it ever existed, was not written on paper, but in the genetic and cultural codes they left behind. In Egypt, a similar story unfolds. The god Thoth, master of knowledge and writing, teaches the art of hieroglyphs and the science of numbers. Isis and Osiris civilized the land after a flood, bringing law and agriculture. Their reign, according to the Turin king list, lasted thousands of years before the first mortal dynasty. Egyptologists call it mythology, yet the records are structured like history, with reigns, genealogies, and successions. They even refer to the era before the flood as Zep Tepi, the first time. Could this be a memory of an earlier civilization, one wiped away by cataclysm but preserved in divine disguise? Further east, the same pattern repeats. In the Andes, Viracocha walks upon the waters, creating life, teaching masonry and astronomy before departing into the Pacific. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, gives writing and timekeeping to humanity, then ascends into the morning star. In Polynesia, the god Cain brings light and order after the flood. Each culture isolated by oceans remembers the same act: descent, teaching, departure. It is almost mathematical in its symmetry, as though civilization itself is a recurring equation whose variables we keep forgetting. Perhaps the gods were not supernatural beings at all, but remnants of a pre-cataclysmic people, the last custodians of an advanced world. If the Great Reset was real, some must have survived. Engineers, astronomers, architects whose knowledge appeared godlike to the scattered survivors of chaos. Over generations, memory turned them into divinity. Their tools became miracles, their languages became prayers. We, the descendants of those survivors, have been trying to reconstruct what they once knew. The Dogon tribe of Marley offers a haunting example. Long before telescopes, they possessed precise knowledge of Sirius, not just the visible star, but its invisible companion, Sirius B, a dense white dwarf invisible to the naked eye. They described its 50-year orbit with astonishing accuracy. Anthropologists once assumed contamination by modern science, but their oral tradition predates European contact. They claim their ancestors were taught this by amphibious beings called the Nommo, who came from the Star of the Deep. To them this was not myth, but history. Similar tales ripple through the Pacific, where the Polynesians speak of the Tangaroa, those who came from the stars in shining vessels. In India's Mahabharata, gods wage aerial wars in flying machines called Vimanas, powered by unknown energies. In ancient China, the Shanhai Jing describes skyborne teachers descending on luminous dragons. Whether one reads them as allegory or testimony, the pattern refuses to fade. Wherever civilization takes root, a visitor stands as its beginning. There are symbols that may preserve their memory more directly. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Mesoamerica, we find the same motif: the winged disk, the sun flanked by outstretched feathers. In Sumer it represents Arnu, in Egypt the solar bark of Ra, in Peru the radiant visage of Inti. To modern eyes, it is decorative. To the ancients, it was an emblem of motion, ascension, and return. Could it be the oldest blueprint of all? Not of religion, but of remembrance. Even more curious are the genetic clues. Studies of ancient DNA reveal sudden, unexplained leaps in human capacity. The expansion of the prefrontal cortex, the appearance of language genes like FOXP2, the abrupt rise of symbolic thinking. Evolution usually crawls, here it seems to have leapt. Was it chance or intervention? If humanity carries the codex of the gods within its very cells, then perhaps what we call divine revelation is biological memory awakening in cycles, triggered by cosmic or environmental change. Some researchers interpret these myths not as fantasies, but as encrypted science, a way to preserve knowledge across dark ages. Flood myths might describe glacial melt. Gods descending from heaven might symbolize meteor impacts or cosmic seeding. The language of myth, after all, is symbolic by necessity. When knowledge becomes too advanced for survival, it hides itself in story, waiting for the world to grow wise enough to read it again. But if such a codex exists, whether in stone, myth, or gene, it is incomplete. Each age inherits fragments. The Sumerians knew celestial mechanics, yet lost metallurgy. Egyptians mastered architecture, yet forgot the stars. We, in turn, know the stars but not the soul. The codex seems to unfold in cycles, granting knowledge and then reclaiming it, as if testing the species that carries it. Perhaps this is why old myths warn against hubris. The fall of Atlantis, the rebellion of Babel, the curse of Prometheus. Knowledge untempered by reverence leads not to enlightenment, but to ruin. Modern science may be rediscovering what the ancients encoded. Quantum physics speaks of vibration and resonance. Ancient temples were built as harmonic amplifiers. Geneticists decode the human genome, calling it the Book of Life. The metaphors are the same. We are reading the same codex, but through microscopes instead of myth. Sometimes, I wonder if the gods truly left at all, or if they simply retreated into the patterns we're only now learning to recognize. They may not dwell in distant stars, but in frequencies, in geometry, in the mathematical fabric of the universe itself. Perhaps when we build particle accelerators, when we probe the quantum veil, we are knocking on the same door the ancients once opened. If they taught us once, will they teach us again? Or are we meant to remember on our own? Maybe the Codex of the Gods is not an artifact to be found, but a realization to be earned, a threshold of understanding that each civilization must approach alone. The first age failed through arrogance, the second through fear. Ours may fail through forgetting, and yet beneath the noise of progress something stirs. The same whisper that guided the builders of pyramids and ziggurats, the same pattern that reappears in our mathematics and our myths. It is patient, recursive, eternal. The Codex is not gone. It is dreaming, waiting for us to learn its language once more, not in worship but in wonder. Every civilization has its vault, a place where what must be remembered and what must be forgotten are kept together, indistinguishable in the dark. The deeper one studies history, the clearer it becomes that knowledge itself has always been a form of power, and power requires control. Not everything humanity once knew was lost by accident. Some truths were sealed away deliberately, hidden under stone, under code, under silence. The forbidden archives, they exist not in one place, but everywhere the guardians of knowledge have chosen to erase, to rewrite, or to keep. The story of the Library of Alexandria is the one we tell most often, as if one fire could explain all forgetting. But even that tale is uncertain. It may have burned once or several times, under Caesar, under Aurelian, under Theophilus. Perhaps the truth is that its destruction was not one event, but a slow suffocation, 1,000 years of erasure disguised as civilization's growth. It was said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, maps of the ancient world, treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and some whispered, texts far older than Greece or Egypt, copied from lands that no longer exist. The fire became legend, but perhaps it was only the visible spark of a longer darkness. Centuries later, another library rose, the Vatican's. Its holds are clean, its shelves endless. It is said to contain more than 85 kilometers of shelving, guarded by walls thicker than the memory of the Middle Ages. There, manuscripts of heretics and mystics sleep beside the records of empires and popes. Access is restricted to the initiated few, scholars whose requests must be approved by unseen hands. What is hidden there is not known. Some speculate on gospels never canonized, on letters that contradict the holy chronology, on documents that trace the lineage of belief to far older to pre-Christian rites. The Vatican insists the secrets are merely administrative, yet secrecy itself becomes an answer louder than words. Beyond Rome there are other archives, less visible, but no less potent. The Serapeum beneath Saqqara, with its sealed granite boxes so immense they seem made for gods, not men. The labyrinth of Hawara, described by Herodotus as containing more chambers than there were stars visible to the eye. The sealed caves of Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, rewriting entire chapters of theology. Each discovery reveals not a past erased, but a past hidden in plain sight. The deeper we dig, the more deliberate the concealment seems. Why hide knowledge? because knowledge destabilizes. A civilization's story depends on its foundations remaining fixed. When new evidence threatens those foundations, the response is never curiosity. It is defense. Throughout history, churches, empires, and academies have burned not only heretics, but their words. The works of Hypatia, the female philosopher of Alexandria, were destroyed with her body. The Cathars were slaughtered in Languedoc for preaching that the material world was a prison, that salvation was memory. Even as late as the Renaissance, Giordano Bruno was burned for claiming that the stars were suns with worlds of their own. An idea now accepted as fact. Truth has always been measured by the century's tolerance. The pattern repeats in modern times. In 1945, at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a farmer uncovered sealed jars filled with papyrus codices, gospels and teachings long declared heretical. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, texts suggesting a different Christianity, one less about authority, more about awakening. For decades they were withheld, translated slowly, debated quietly. Even in the age of reason, the instinct to guard knowledge remains. Power, after all, depends on what others are not allowed to know. There are whispers that the Vatican's restricted collections hold pre-flood tablets, Atlantean maps, even documents describing contact between early humans and otherworldly visitors. These claims, of course, cannot be verified. But we do know that thousands of manuscripts confiscated from pagan, Gnostic, and mystical sects were never returned. Their contents, if ever revealed, might alter the accepted chronology of civilization. Perhaps the priest of memory keep them not to protect belief, but to protect stability. For what happens when the collective story changes overnight? Even outside religious institutions, the modern world practices its own form of archiving by omission. Classified files, sealed research, data locked behind corporate firewalls. The technology that connects us also filters us, showing what we are allowed to see. Algorithms have become the new gatekeepers of knowledge, deciding what vanishes from collective sight. In this sense, the forbidden archives are no longer confined to stone vaults. They're woven into our networks, our timelines, our digital amnesia. The keepers have changed, but the method remains the same. Hide the dangerous, preserve the useful, silence the rest. And yet, fragments escape. A lost scroll reappears in the desert. A forgotten map emerges in an antique dealer's drawer. A satellite reveals geometric patterns beneath the Sahara that no wind could have made. Each rediscovery feels less like coincidence and more like resistance, as if truth itself wants to be found, no matter how deep it's buried. For every secret kept, the earth answers with one revealed. Consider the strange synchrony of timing. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, the same year as the Roswell incident. Two different kinds of revelation, both challenging official narratives of origin. A coincidence, perhaps, or a sign that something greater than history was stirring, forcing humanity to look at its own reflection more closely than it wished to. It's as though the archives we cannot enter begin to open themselves, piece by piece, through accident and curiosity. But maybe the greatest forbidden archive is not a building at all, it is the human mind. Within each of us lies the same pattern of concealment, memory layered beneath conditioning, instinct buried beneath logic, ancient awareness smothered by modern distraction. When mystics and shamans speak of initiation, of descending into the underworld to retrieve knowledge, perhaps they are describing this process. The true vault is internal. The guardians are our fears. The key is not found in a library, but in the quiet act of remembering. One day, the walls of secrecy, political, religious, digital, may fall. But even then, the deeper vault will remain. the one within the collective psyche of humanity, where every suppressed truth still hums, waiting to be recalled. The knowledge locked away in those forbidden shells may be less important than what it symbolizes: the eternal tension between light and shadow, revelation and silence. Perhaps that is why the great libraries burn again and again, not because of accident, but because every civilization must decide at the height of its power how much truth it can bear to see. And maybe that is where we stand now, before the vault door, its hinges trembling, the air heavy with forgotten dust. What would happen if we turned the handle, if we allowed the forbidden to breathe? Would we be blinded, or finally able to see? If you stand in the center of certain ancient structures, the Hypogeum of Malta, the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, the stone circles of Avebury or Callanish, and speak, the air itself begins to sing back. The walls hum, not as echo, but as resonance. Frequencies bloom in the chest like invisible waves of gravity. Sound becomes presence, presence becomes vibration, and vibration becomes memory. It is in these moments that one senses the ancients were not merely builders, but composers, shaping the architecture of silence into instruments of the earth. Modern science calls it archaeoacoustics, the study of ancient sound design. But to those who carved the stone, it was something more sacred. The builders of megaliths did not raise their monuments solely to mark the heavens or house the dead. They built them to speak with the earth. Stonehenge, for instance, is not only aligned at the solstices, its circular form creates an acoustic shell that amplifies voices and drum beats into rhythmic pulses. The frequency produced inside echoes the same range as the human heartbeat. It is as if those who gathered there entered into resonance with their own biology, tuning themselves to the planet's hidden rhythm. The Hypogeum of Halsafliani in Malta goes further. Within its subterranean chambers, a male voice chanting at around 110 Hz can make the entire chamber vibrate, inducing sensations of floating, clarity, or unease. Modern measurements confirm that the architecture was deliberately tuned to these frequencies. In one chamber, the vibrations are so strong that listeners experience hemispheric synchronization, the brain's left and right sides aligning, producing states of trance. It seems impossible that Neolithic builders could have known this without instruments, yet the precision is undeniable. Were they experimenting or remembering? Egypt's Great Pyramid holds a similar secret. Acoustic engineers have shown that sound waves generated in the King's Chamber amplify specific frequencies, forming standing waves that travel through the granite. The sarcophagus itself resonates like a tuning fork. Some researchers speculate that chanting or percussion within those chambers could have generated harmonic fields capable of altering perception. Or perhaps, as fringe theories suggest, energy. While mainstream archaeology attributes these effects to coincidence, coincidence cannot explain repetition. Across continents, builders separated by oceans shaped stone to sing in precisely the same way. Ancient myths may preserve this understanding in symbolic form. In the beginning, say the Vedas, the universe was created through sound, the vibration Om. In Egyptian cosmology, Tar speaks creation into existence. The Greeks called it Logos, the divine word. Modern physics now echoes this metaphor. At the smallest scale, all matter vibrates. The universe itself hums at frequencies beyond hearing. The ancients seem to know this intuitively. To them, stone was not inert. It was a frozen tone, awaiting reactivation through voice or ritual. Even the materials reveal intention. Many megalithic sites are built from limestone, granite, or quartz-rich stone, minerals that respond strongly to vibration and electromagnetic fields. Quartz, in particular, can convert mechanical pressure into electric energy, a principle we use today in radio transmitters and watches. Could the ancients have used this property in their temples, turning sound into force, matter into resonance? It sounds impossible, yet every pyramid, ziggurat, and dolmen seems to share these materials like notes in a cosmic scale. In 1978, researcher Paul Devereaux conducted experiments in megalithic chambers using controlled frequencies. Participants reported visual and auditory hallucinations, light patterns, whispers, a sense of presence. Their brainwaves shifted into theta rhythms, associated with dreams and deep meditation. These effects mirror those described in ancient ritual texts, where initiates heard the gods speak or soar through the veil. Perhaps the temples were designed as gateways not of stone, but of sound, spaces where vibration thinned the boundary between the physical and the unseen. When we consider sound as architecture, the old question of how the ancients moved such massive stones takes on new meaning. Legends of stones that floated or danced when sung to may not be pure fantasy. Tibetan monks, for example, were once observed using trumpets and rhythmic drumming to raise stones along cliff faces. Modern experiments with acoustic levitation show that high-frequency vibrations can indeed lift small objects. Scale that technology by knowledge lost, and the impossible begins to shimmer into plausibility. Music itself may be the oldest technology we possess. Before writing, before numbers, humans understood vibration. The first shamans used drums to mimic the heartbeat of the earth. The first builders translated that rhythm into walls of stone. Even today, cathedrals mimic the same geometry. The vaulted ceilings of Gothic churches amplify choral resonance into a cathedral of frequencies, evoking awe, stillness, tears. The same emotions ancient priests must have felt in their stone sanctuaries. We have changed instruments, not intention, but something was lost along the way. The modern world hears sound only as entertainment, not revelation. The ancients used it as dialogue, with the planet, with themselves, with the divine. Perhaps their monuments are not messages from the past, but instruments left for the future. They wait, silent, until someone remembers how to play them again. Imagine standing inside the king's chamber as a low tone rises, matching your heartbeat, merging with it. The air vibrates, dust trembles, vision blurs, and for a fleeting moment, the boundary between body and stone dissolves. You feel not separate, but woven into something vast and rhythmic. The same pulse that moves the tides, the same oscillation that stirs the stars. This was their music. This was their prayer. In every age, humans seek the same mystery: how to align themselves with the unseen pattern of the world. The ancients built it into stone. We search written equations. Both pursuits chase the same sound, the hum of existence, the chord that binds all matter. Perhaps one day, scientists will rediscover the frequency of the earth, the Schumann resonance, or the quantum vibration that underlies reality, and realize that it is the same note sung by priests 5,000 years ago in Malta, Egypt, and beyond. And when that day comes, perhaps we'll understand why the stones were made to sing. They are not relics, they are reminders. Their silence is not absence, but waiting. The pause between notes in an unfinished symphony. If we learn again to listen, perhaps we'll hear what they've been echoing all along. The creation itself is a vibration sustained by consciousness, and every living thing is part of that song. The stones are still humming. We have simply forgotten the melody. The earth has always been mapped by memory long before it was mapped by mathematics. Once the lines between sea and land were drawn not in ink, but in imagination. Stars reflected upon the oceans, mirrored constellations upon the soil, Every ancient map was both geography and cosmology, a way of seeing heaven in the folds of the earth. And yet, among the maps that survived the centuries, there are some that should not exist. Documents that remember landscapes lost to time, continents veiled beneath ice, and coastlines that predate human civilization. They seem to whisper the same impossible truth. Someone, somewhere, once knew the world in its entirety. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral of that name, remains one of the most puzzling relics in cartography. Compiled from older sources now lost, it shows the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and most impossibly the northern coast of Antarctica, free of ice. Officially, Antarctica was not discovered until 1820, and even then it was buried beneath miles of glacial cover. Yet the contours on Piri Reis's parchment match modern seismic surveys of the continent's subglacial terrain with uncanny accuracy. How could a 16th-century sailor have mapped a land that no one alive had seen? Historians propose that Piri Reis copied from earlier charts, perhaps from Greek or Phoenician sources, perhaps even from the legendary Library of Alexandria. But if those sources existed, they imply a far old seafaring culture, one with instruments capable of measuring latitude and longitude, before any known civilization possessed such tools. The admiral himself wrote in the margins that his data came from maps drawn in the time of Alexander, and some from the time of the ancients. He claimed to have used 20 charts, including one from the age of the prophets. It is a confession that sounds more like inheritance than invention. The anomaly is not isolated. The Orange-Finet map of 1531 and the Boitchy map of 1737 both depict Antarctica's hidden coastline without its ice sheet. Even more curiously, these maps align with the Earth's rotation at a different pole position, suggesting that whoever first charted them did so when the continent was ice-free, roughly 12,000 years ago, during the last interglacial period. That date coincides eerily with the end of the Younger Dryas cataclysm, the same reset we have already traced through flood myths and geological scars. Were these maps remnants of that lost world, copied through generations until their meaning faded into legend? Ancient cultures seemed obsessed with the marriage between heaven and earth. The Egyptians aligned their pyramids to Orion's belt. The Angkor temples mirrored the constellation Draco. The Mayans built entire cities in reflection of the Milky Way. These were not random acts of devotion. They were mirrors, cartographies of the sky laid upon the ground. Perhaps their builders believed that by recreating celestial geometry on Earth, they were re-anchoring memory itself, preserving knowledge of cosmic order through architecture. The same impulse that guided the astronomer's eye guided the mason's hand. If the stars above were guides for the soul, then the maps below were guides for the body, instructions for navigation across both sea and spirit. Some of the earliest surviving maps carved into stone in Italy and Mesopotamia show mountain ranges and rivers that no longer exist, as though copied from a geological memory, not direct observation. Even in pre-Columbian America, the Toltecs and later the Aztecs spoke of a mirror world, Aztlan, the luminous homeland reflected in the night sky, a place destroyed by floods and fire. Its survivors, they said, scattered to rebuild under the stars. The pattern emerges again and again: a civilization, a flood, a migration, a map, and always, above them, the same constellations watching silently as if recording. When archaeologists discovered the Niebuhr sky disk in Germany, a bronze plate dated to 1600 BCE depicting the Sun, Moon, and Pleiades, it became the earliest known star map. Yet the arrangement of stars on that disk mirrors not the sky of a Bronze Age Europe, but a configuration from millennia earlier. Someone had preserved a memory of the heavens from an older world. What is a map after all? but an act of defiance against forgetting. Each one claims, "We were here. We knew this." The mystery is that some maps remember places we could not have known. The river systems under the Sahara, the submerged ridges of the Atlantic, the ice-free poles. Modern satellites confirm details only hinted at in these forbidden geographies. It's as if the planet itself once had witnesses who saw it whole, from above, or from an age when seas and skies were arranged differently. Some have suggested that such knowledge could only have come from flight, from vantage points in the air or beyond it. Others imagine a civilization so ancient that its sailors circumnavigated the globe before the Ice Age curtains fell. But perhaps the truth lies between. The ancients may have known that earth and sky mirror one another. By charting the movement of stars across centuries, they could infer the shape of continents below. A cosmic geometry connects both. What happens above reflects what exists below. And those who understood that pattern could reconstruct the world without ever leaving it. Still, one cannot ignore how fiercely certain knowledge has been suppressed. After the fall of Alexandria, the custodians of new faiths redrew the world according to doctrine. Spherical earths became forbidden, and older charts were destroyed or hidden. Even today, entire archives of early cartography remain locked away, classified under national treasures or private collections. Perhaps because such maps do not fit the linear story. They speak of a past when humanity was global, before it was tribal, scientific before it was literate. Every rediscovered map challenges our sense of scale. The Piri-Reis chart is only a fragment, half a world. What if the other fragments still exist, sleeping in forgotten monasteries or beneath the Vatican vaults, together forming a complete vision of a world that predates ours? A world where knowledge of the globe was not discovery, but memory. Sometimes I imagine those ancient map makers standing on cliffs under the same stars we see tonight, drawing not what they saw, but what they remembered. Perhaps their maps were never meant for sailors at all, but for us. Messages sent forward through time, waiting for the ice to melt again, waiting for eyes that could finally understand. The stars still shine upon oceans that no longer exist, and the continents beneath them still follow their celestial mirrors. The sky remembers the world as it was. It is we who forget. And when we stare at those old maps, at their impossible accuracy, their elegant curves of vanished coastlines, perhaps we're not just looking at the past, but at a reflection of our own future. A reminder that even the face of the earth can change, but the heavens never lie. Sometimes the end does not come from below. It falls from the sky. For as long as the earth has turned, fire has rained upon it. The ancients remembered this not as metaphor, but as memory. The day when stars fell, when the heavens burned red, when gods hurled lightning and mountains melted. We find their stories scattered across continents, telling of a time when the sky itself descended to erase what had been built. It is easy to dismiss such tales as myth, until we look at the scars on the planet, glassed deserts, magnetic anomalies, layers of soot and ash that appear without volcanic cores. The heavens, it seems, have struck us before. The Tunguska event of 1908 was one such reminder. In the quiet taiga of Siberia, a blinding explosion flattened more than 2,000 square kilometers of forest. No crater, no meteorite, only trees bent outward as though by an invisible hand. Eyewitnesses spoke of a sphere of fire brighter than the sun, followed by a shockwave that circled the Earth twice. Scientists now attribute it to a comet or asteroid that exploded in the atmosphere, releasing energy equivalent to hundreds of atomic bombs. Yet the most haunting part is how familiar the story sounds. The same image appears in the Mahabharata, describing a single projectile charged with the power of the universe. A weapon so bright that it reduced the earth to ashes, Thousands of years apart, the same skyfire repeats its role, the silent eraser of civilizations. Around the world, traces of vitrification, stone melted into glass, remain unexplained. In Scotland, hill forts show signs of intense heat that fused rock together, temperatures reaching thousands of degrees. In the Middle East, ancient layers of cities such as Tel el-Hammam display the same signature. Bricks crystallized, pottery bubbled, skeletons charred in positions of sudden death. Recent studies suggest that Tel el-Hammam, often linked to the biblical Sodom, was annihilated around 1650 BCE by a cosmic airburst, a meteor exploding above the city. The shockwave would have leveled everything, its heat flash igniting salt and sulfur from the Dead Sea, leaving behind a wasteland. The myth of divine punishment may simply be the memory of a cosmic disaster. Far older, in the American Midwest, lies a thin black layer known as the Younger Dryas boundary. Within it are microscopic diamonds, platinum and nanospheres, remnants of impact debris. Beneath this layer, mammoths, mastodons, and the last ice age flora vanish. Above it, a different world begins. Something enormous struck or exploded in the atmosphere 12,900 years ago, ending an epoch and beginning another. The flood myths, the sudden cold, the rise of sea levels, all align with this fiery moment. The fire from heaven was not judgment, but transition. Ancient peoples remembered in symbols what science now confirms in data. Petroglyphs from Arizona to the Sahara depict spiral suns, radiant orbs, and figures shielding their faces. The same motifs appear in Australia and India, human silhouettes watching the sky collapse. Plasma physicists have studied these carvings, concluding they resemble natural auroral formations produced by massive solar flares or cosmic electrical discharges. If the sun once ejected plasma on a scale far greater than modern storms, it could have scorched the upper atmosphere, ignited forest fires, and erased civilizations dependent on fragile climates. Perhaps the gods of thunder were never mythic. Perhaps they were solar. The ancients built observatories not only to predict seasons, but to watch for danger. The Maya and Inca tracked solar cycles with mathematical precision, warning that the sun eats its children every few thousand years. The Chinese chroniclers recorded fire stars and dragons in the sky that heralded dynastic collapse. Even in medieval Europe, monks noted auroras as omens of divine wrath. Beneath the superstition lay an intuitive knowledge that heaven's peace is temporary. The same star that gives life occasionally tests it. There is a strange symmetry in this cosmic rhythm. The earth grows, learns, reaches toward the stars, and then from the stars something returns to remind it of fragility. Cataclysm, reset, renewal. The fire that fell may have destroyed worlds, but it also forged the conditions for new ones. After each impact, ecosystems reinvent themselves, species evolve faster, civilizations rebuild stronger, until the next breath of cosmic flame. In the deserts of Libya, a pale green glass still glitters among the dunes. Known as Libyan desert glass, it stretches across hundreds of square kilometers, the result of temperatures so high, they liquefied sand. Tutankhamun's burial pendant contains a piece of it carved into the shape of a scarab, a symbol of rebirth forged from celestial fire. Modern analysis suggests the glass formed around 28 million years ago, likely from an airburst similar to Tunguska. But its presence in the pharaoh's amulet hints that the Egyptians understood its origin, that they revered it as a relic of the heavens. Even more haunting is the ancient site of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, where skeletal remains were found lying in the streets fused with radioactive residue. Theories range from natural geological radiation to cosmic or artificial sources. Although mainstream archaeology rejects the idea of ancient weapons, the texts of the region tell a different story. In the Mahabharata and Ramayana, gods wield weapons that could burn the sky, shake the earth, and leave survivors' hair and nails falling out. Descriptions disturbingly similar to radiation sickness. Myth, once again, preserves what history refuses to admit: that humanity has seen the end of the world before. Even in the Bible, fire from heaven returns as a recurring motif, from the destruction of Sodom to the apocalyptic visions of Revelation. Perhaps it endures because it is true, because some ancestral part of us remembers the night the heavens turned against us, and maybe, deep down, we know it will happen again. Astronomers now track thousands of near-Earth objects, comets and asteroids passing invisibly close to our orbit. A single fragment, miles wide, could end all we know in seconds. Our telescopes may delay ignorance, but they cannot erase inevitability. Still, there is a strange peace in this knowledge. The fire from heaven does not discriminate. It renews. Each impact reminds the cosmos of its own impermanence, resetting life's grand experiment. The same event that erases can also awaken, forging new minerals, unlocking buried water, scattering seeds of evolution. Creation and destruction are the same breath in different octaves. The ancients may have feared the sky, but they also worshipped it for this reason. The fire that kills also gives birth. Tonight, as meteors streak faintly across the dark, we stand under the same heavens our ancestors once trembled beneath. The earth still spins, scarred but alive. Perhaps the next fire is already on its way, a silent ember drifting through the void. When it comes, we will look up, and for an instant see what they saw, the terrible beauty of the universe remembering us. And after that flash, there will be silence again. A long, waiting silence, like the pause between one heartbeat and the next. History, it seems, never dies. It reincarnates in blood. Long after temples crumble and languages vanish, memory travels quietly through lineage. It hides in the veins of families, in rituals, in symbols passed hand to hand across generations. Each civilization leaves not only ruins but inheritors, guardians of knowledge who carry fragments of a forgotten order. The ancients spoke often of sacred bloodlines, kings who are more than men, priests who are born to remember, and initiates who bore within them the residue of a greater ancestry. If knowledge was once given by gods, perhaps those who received it ensured it would not vanish with the flood. The Sumerians were the first to speak of this openly. Their kings, they said, did not rule by choice but by descent from the Anunnaki. The Sumerian king list traces their reigns back thousands of years before the flood. Impossibly long durations that defy biological sense, but suggest symbolic continuity. Each king may have represented a lineage of keepers rather than a single individual. After the deluge, the throne passed to those who came down from heaven, and then, slowly, to mortals. It is as if the divine inheritance diluted over time, fading like ink in the bloodstream of humanity. Egypt carried this pattern forward. Pharaohs claimed descent from the gods, calling themselves the sons of Ra, embodiments of divine order upon earth. The royal blood was sacred, its purity guarded through ritual marriage and dynastic isolation. Even the coronation ceremony was a reenactment of the first moment of creation, the uniting of heaven and earth through a living vessel. To rule Egypt was to embody the cosmic memory of Zep-Tepi, the first time. The priests of Heliopolis whispered that their ancestors were not gods in the celestial sense, but bearers of knowledge from before the flood, survivors who taught humankind how to begin again. Similar traditions appear elsewhere. The Inca traced their origins to Viracocha's children, luminous beings emerging from Lake Titicaca. The Mayan priest kings claimed descent from the people of the sky. In China, the first emperors were said to be born of dragons, a metaphor of a celestial blood. Even in medieval Europe, monarchs ruled by divine right, asserting a sacred thread connecting them to heaven. Beneath the politics and myth, one theme persists: that certain lines of humanity carried memory deeper than others, that wisdom itself could be hereditary. When the ancient world fell, this idea did not vanish. It went underground. The torch of knowledge passed from temples to secret orders, from open worship to hidden brotherhoods. The Pythagoreans in Greece, the Essenes in Judea, the Hermetic schools of Egypt, and later the Knights Templar in Europe, all claimed initiation through descent, not of blood but of mind. To them the true inheritance was consciousness, yet even consciousness can follow lineage, passed like flame through families who remember. Legends of the Grail may conceal this idea in symbolic form. The Holy Grail, long sought by knights and mystics, is often imagined as a cup, but in older texts it's called a sang reel, the royal blood. Some interpret this literally, that it represents a bloodline descending from Christ and Mary Magdalene, preserved through hidden dynasties in France or beyond. Others see it as metaphor, the preservation of divine awareness through chosen vessels, a lineage of spirit rather than flesh. Either way, the story serves the same function: to suggest that humanity's forgotten origin survives through a few who still remember what we once were. Throughout history, these keepers appear briefly, altering the world before vanishing again. Akhenaten of Egypt, who worshipped a single sun disk, seemed to revive an older memory of cosmic unity before being erased from his own monuments. Pythagoras claimed to recall his past lives, speaking of harmony as the lore of the universe. The Essenes preserved astronomical and healing knowledge that would later echo in Gnostic texts. The Templars gathered relics and writings from the Holy Land, said to contain secrets older than Scripture. Each movement rises, guards something luminous, then falls into persecutional myth. Perhaps the rhythm itself is deliberate, concealment as protection. Bloodlines can also be metaphysical. The Tibetan Lamas speak of tulkus, reincarnated masters who return generation after generation, drawn to the same families or regions. Indigenous shamans say that ancestral spirits choose their descendants as vessels for memory. Even modern genetics hints at epigenetic memory, experiences encoded in DNA, inherited beyond conscious awareness. Trauma, wisdom, fear, intuition, all can ripple through generations unseen. Science, unwillingly, edges closer to what ancient mystics knew: that blood remembers. There are places where these threads still converge: mountain monasteries, desert brotherhoods, forgotten archives beneath cathedrals. From Ethiopia's guardians of the Ark to India's Nath yogis, from the Druze of Lebanon to the shamans of the Andes, each keeps fragments of the same language, a remembrance of a time when humanity and divinity were not separate. They describe cycles of rise and fall, epochs of light followed by darkness. And they all speak of a coming return, when the ancient knowledge will surface again through those whose blood and spirit still resonate with its frequency. If this sounds fantastical, consider how civilizations preserve memory even today. Family names, coats of arms, oral genealogies, all attempt to defy the amnesia of time. Somewhere in each of us lies a forgotten inheritance, an instinct toward reverence, a pull toward the sacred geometry that our ancestors once lived by. The notion of divine blood may not mean supernatural ancestry, but heightened awareness. The memory of unity before division, of knowledge before dogma. In this sense, every human being carries a spark of that royal lineage waiting to be remembered. Yet power distorts even purity. Over centuries, the myth of sacred blood became justification for hierarchy, conquest, empire. Kings who once saw themselves as stewards of divine order turned that title into ownership. The sacred became political, and the memory it carried began to fade under corruption. Perhaps that too is part of the cycle, the inevitable forgetting that precedes rediscovery. Still, the blood remembers. Whether in dreams, intuition, or déjà vu, fragments of the old knowledge surface unexpectedly. We feel drawn to ancient symbols we have never studied, to ruins we have never seen. It is as though the body itself recognizes places the mind cannot name. These are not coincidences. They are echoes of lineage. Humanity, divided by borders and faiths, is bound by a shared ancestry far older than we admit. And maybe that is what the old priesthoods feared most, that one day the secret would no longer belong to a few. The bloodlines would merge, the memory would awaken in everyone, and the divine heritage once hoarded by the powerful would return to the collective. In that moment, the cycle would truly end, for the gods would no longer need temples. They would live again through us. When we speak of awakening, perhaps it is not spiritual poetry at all, but biology, the reactivation of an ancient code within human consciousness, a remembering of who we were before the flood, before the fall, before history was rewritten. And when that code reawakens, the bloodlines of memory will cease to be lineage and become humanity itself. A single species remembering its divine origin, singing again in the harmony it once knew. Every civilization eventually turns its back on memory. At first, forgetting feels like freedom, the shedding of myth, the triumph of progress. But the further we move from the sacred, the more we begin to confuse amnesia for enlightenment. The ancients built monuments to remembrance. We build towers to efficiency. They gazed at the stars to know where they came from. We look at screens to forget where we are. The age of forgetting did not begin with war or disaster. It began with comfort, the slow erosion of wonder beneath the weight of certainty. There was a time when knowledge was experience, not information, when to know the stars meant to stand beneath them until one's soul could feel their rhythm. When to know the earth meant to listen to the soil, to rivers, to wind. Now we measure rather than feel. We call it progress, but something subtle has been exchanged. Wisdom for data, silence for noise. The cathedrals of stone have become laboratories of glass, and while our instruments see further than ever, our hearts rarely see at all. The archaeologists who unearth the ruins of old worlds often speak of the aim sadness. Beneath each layer of soil lies not just destruction, but neglect, a gradual forgetting. Pottery replaced by plastic, faith replaced by function. The older the civilization, the more it seems to have remembered something essential about its place in the cosmos. The newer, the more it insists that the cosmos has no place for it at all. It is as if human history has been a long process of unlearning what once was instinct. Philosophers have named this process in many ways: disenchantment, secularization, modernization. But its essence is the same: a separation of the visible from the invisible. In the ancient world there was no such division. A river had a spirit, a mountain was a god, the stars were guides. In forgetting this, we have not become more rational. We have merely become smaller, trapped within what our machines can confirm. The keepers of knowledge have also changed. Once they were priests, astronomers, and storytellers, weaving myth and science together as a single language of the divine. Now they are specialists, each confined to their field, each knowing more about less. The great unity of wisdom is fragmented into disciplines, footnotes, and algorithms. We have gained precision but lost meaning. We can trace the age of a star to the decimal, yet cannot answer why it still moves us to tears. Even our history has been sterilized. What cannot be explained is dismissed. What cannot be categorized is erased. The great mysteries, the origins of language, the precision of megaliths, the sudden appearance of civilization, are treated as inconvenient questions. We are told that curiosity should end where evidence ends. But truth is not a cage built from what we can prove. It is a horizon that recedes the closer we approach. In our arrogance, we have mistaken knowledge for understanding. Somewhere in this descent into certainty, the sacred vanished. The stars no longer speak, the stones no longer sing, and time itself feels mechanical. The cycles once honored by calendars and rituals are now managed by digital clocks. The pulse of Earth, once mirrored in harvests and equinoxes, is drowned beneath fluorescent light. We have forgotten that to live was once to participate in a cosmic symphony, not merely to observe it. The old stories warned of this forgetting. The Greeks called it the Iron Age, when men would no longer remember the gods. The Hindus called it Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, when truth would be fractured and greed mistaken for virtue. In the Popol Vuh, the gods destroyed the first humans because they had become too proud of their intellect and no longer remembered their creators. Across myth and scripture, the message is consistent. Forgetting is not a flaw in the cycle. It is its final stage. And yet, even in this twilight, the faint glow of remembrance persists. The growing fascination with ancient mysteries, the resurgence of meditation and symbolism, the global hunger for meaning beyond material, all of it suggests that the wheel is turning once more. Perhaps the age of forgetting is also the age of gestation, when what was buried begins to stir beneath the surface of consciousness. Every civilization must descend before it can rise. Every collective must forget before it can remember anew. But the cost of forgetting is high. When humanity severs its link to the sacred, it also loses its sense of proportion. Without reverence, technology becomes domination. Without mystery, exploration becomes exploitation. The same mind that once built temples to align with the stars now drills through the earth without pores, blind to the rhythm it disrupts. We are advancing faster than ever, yet the destination grows emptier the closer we arrive. Progress without memory is motion without direction, an orbit with no center. Still, the earth remembers even when we do not. Its mountains carry the pulse of ancient songs. Its magnetic fields still hum with resonance. Its stones still echo with the frequencies of lost temples. We may forget their purpose, but they do not forget us. Perhaps that is why ruins draw us with such quiet magnetism. We stand among them and feel, if only faintly, that we are not the first to dream, to build, to fall. The wind through broken columns is not merely sound. It is the whisper of recognition. The age of forgetting has no villain. It is not the fault of science or reason, but of imbalance, a collective amnesia born from turning all our attention outward, never inward. We have mapped the galaxies, but not our own depths. We can send machines beyond the solar system, yet struggle to hear the voice within. The ancients built monuments to remember the sky. We build databases to remember ourselves, and yet both are attempts to defeat the same adversary. Time. Perhaps what we call progress is merely another stage in the great rhythm of remembering and forgetting. The ancients built in stone, we build in silicon. Both crumble, both endure. And one day, our own glass towers will lie in ruins, half buried beneath the dust, while some future archaeologist sifts through their remains and wonders, as we now wonder of the pyramids. What did they know? What did they lose? Maybe in that far future they will feel a quiet sadness and a spark of recognition. For the age of forgetting is never final. Beneath its surface lies the seed of remembrance, waiting for the right silence to grow. When the noise fades and the stars return to the human imagination, the cycle will begin again. We will remember that knowledge without reference is blindness, and that the past is never gone, only sleeping. And perhaps then, standing among our own ruins, we will lift our eyes once more, hearing faintly what the ancients heard, the quiet music of the universe, calling us back to the beginning. The night of history is long, but dawn always returns. Beneath the rubble of fallen cities, beneath the centuries of silence, something ancient still breathes. It waits, patient and unseen, in the cracks between our discoveries and our denials. We call it mystery, but perhaps 'tis memory, the slow awakening of a truth that cannot stay buried forever. Every age believes itself the first to awaken, but the earth knows better. What is buried is never lost. What sleeps in dust will one day open its eyes again. Archaeologists call it coincidence when ancient knowledge re-emerges, but patterns are forming, discoveries aligning across continents like pieces of a forgotten design. Ice retreats, revealing temples older than civilization. Sandstorms uncover lost cities once described only in myth. At Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple, carved pillars reveal constellations that speak of cataclysm, of a sky once filled with fire. In the Sahara, satellite images show rivers and green valleys beneath dunes, suggesting that what is now desert was once the cradle of life. Beneath Antarctica's ice, radar finds mountain ranges and possible signs of structures long entombed. Every new revelation feels less like progress and more like déjà vu. We're not learning something new. We're remembering. Humanity has reached the edge of forgetting. For centuries we looked outward, exploring space, dissecting atoms, mapping the genome. Yet the greatest frontier still lies beneath our feet, in the unexamined strata of time. Each discovery of a lost city or unexplained artifact feels like the planet whispering, "Look closer." The stones are restless. The archives of the earth are beginning to reopen. Some call it coincidence. Others feel a quiet inevitability, as though the earth itself has decided that the veil has thinned enough for truth to rise. Perhaps this is what the ancients meant when they spoke of cyclical ages, that knowledge, like the sun, must set before it can rise. We are the generation caught between those horizons. The old myths, once dismissed, begin to resonate again. Science and spirituality edge toward convergence. Quantum physics describes a universe of vibration and consciousness, an echo of the same wisdom that priests of Heliopolis once whispered within their sun temples. Geologists find evidence of cataclysms that match flood legends word for word. Linguists trace languages back to protoforms older than known civilization. It is as if a buried melody, long silenced, has begun to hum beneath the noise of modernity. There are signs, too, in human consciousness. The collective dream is shifting. People everywhere, separated by distance and culture, awaken with the same unease, a sense that something immense has been forgotten. This restlessness manifests in art, in science, and philosophy. We build telescopes to peer into the beginning of time, as if searching for our own lost reflection. We speak of simulation, of consciousness as the fabric of reality. Ideas that once belonged to mystics now cross the lips of physicists. The boundaries between ancient myth and modern theory blur until they are indistinguishable. It feels less like discovery and more like recollection. The Earth's magnetic field is drifting. The poles shift faster each decade. Some say it is natural, part of a planetary cycle. Others whisper of synchronization, that human awareness and planetary energy are entwined, each reflecting the other's awakening. Old texts spoke of this moment, the end of the Kali Yuga, the turning of the great year, the return of the first time. But perhaps it is not the world that ends, only the illusion of separation between what is sacred and what is real. Even our ruins seem to respond. The DAR scanning in the Amazon reveals networks of cities beneath the forest canopy, vast as any in the old world. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Combat, sonar images show geometric patterns suggesting structures now buried under 70 feet of sediment. When these findings surface, they are met with skepticism, yet the rhythm persists. More evidence, more silence, more resistance. It is as though the past re-emerges too quickly for the present to bear. Knowledge returns not in a flood, but in waves. The question is no longer whether lost civilizations existed, but why their memory was buried. Perhaps the forgetting was necessary, a kind of planetary reset, allowing humanity to evolve without the weight of its own history. If the ancients possessed knowledge capable of reshaping the world, technologies of resonance, consciousness, or energy, then to lose it may have been both tragedy and mercy. The earth is merciful when it forgets. It gives us time to grow again without the burden of the last fall. But mercy has limits. The ground does not sleep forever. Sometimes I imagine the final archaeologist of this cycle, someone in a future age kneeling in the dust above the ruins of our world, brushing sand from a fragment of silicon or glass. They will wonder, as we now wonder of Atlantis or Sumer. Who were they? How did they forget so much? Perhaps they will feel the same pulse of awe and grief that we feel standing before the pyramids or the silent statues of Easter Island. And perhaps, as they look upward, they will sense what we are only beginning to grasp, that forgetting is never permanent, and that every fall contains within it the seed of awakening. Maybe the signs have always been there, subtle and persistent. The repeating cycles of flood and fire, the myths that survive across tongues, the magnetic pull toward ruins and stars. Something in us recognizes these patterns even if our minds resist. Deep down, the soul knows that this is not the first dawn, nor will it be the last. We've been here before, builders, dreamers, witnesses to both brilliance and ruin. What we call progress may simply be remembering how to listen again. And so, the dust begins to stir. Beneath it lies the heartbeat of forgotten ages, faint but steady. Each discovery, each question, each whisper from the past brings us closer to that rhythm. The awakening is not sudden. It unfolds like the slow light of morning across the face of stone. The myths we dismissed are returning as facts. The science we worship begins to sound like prayer. Between them, a bridge forms, delicate, luminous, unbreakable. Perhaps that is the true destiny of humanity. Not to reach the stars, but to remember that we already came from them. The Lost Epoch is not only behind us, it is within us, waiting to be recalled through the quiet art of wonder. As we awaken, the dust settles, revealing not a new world but the same one, seen at last for what it has always been, sacred, cyclical, alive. And when the wind moves through the ruins again, it will sound like breath. The earth exhaling after a long sleep, whispering through time to all who can still hear. You were never lost. You only forgot.